Hello, bonjour, bienvenue, and welcome to C'est la vie. My name is Shin Ling Low, and I am so honored to be guiding you through our bonus episode. I am a multidisciplinary artist and facilitator based in Delgado, Montreal. This episode's topic, youth community organizers during the pandemic, is something that is close to my heart as someone who is devoted to curating spaces that enrich, support, and empower people. The COVID-19 pandemic brought a sense of crisis and uncertainty, and especially the surfacing of pre-existing societal issues such as housing issues, anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism, the acute rise in anti-Asian hate crimes, environmental issues, ableism, and so much more. 2020 was a rough year, and it hasn't gotten particularly easier. So what does it mean to live through a pandemic that completely shifted the way we gather and how we can be in presence with one another? How has that shifted community organizing work? Here are the stories and projects of 3 amazing organizers.
It took a summer. And we just shifted everything.
That was Joanna Kanga that you just heard, a communications assistant for the Minister of International Trade, Export Promotions, Small Businesses, and Economic Development in Canada, as well as one of the founding members of Black Girls Gather, a book club housed by the West Island Black Community Association that brings together young Black girls between 12 and 18 years old to discuss literary works of Black authors. The project planning started slightly before the pandemic, and they had to radically shift their work in March 2020.
The original plan was to have a space where we would have this small library. We would decorate the space. We had made this whole Google Doc with like stuff from IKEA that we had couches, and we were like, oh my God, this is gonna be so cute. Oh. We have to readjust, and like I say, we are rock stars at doing a lot with not so much. And that's what we did.
Joanna also humbly mentioned that the success of Black Girls Gather was a community effort.
I have to say, we didn't do all of this by ourselves. We are under the West Island Black Community Association. Those are mentors and people who supported us. Kemba Mitchell, Joan, those are women who were there with us during that process and made sure that we would be okay and that we would be able to still open and launch this project by the date that we had originally planned to.
Because it was like this shocking revelation that we are in one of the most extraordinary times in human history or recent human history. We could never have predicted that there would be a global pandemic that would completely halt typical kinds of engagement and connection.
That is Faith Paré, a storyteller from Toronto, of Afro-Guyanese ancestry who writes poetry, performance, and criticism. She moved to Quebec in 2017. I wanted to include Faith immediately after coming up with the topic because the start of our friendship was a result of community organizing. We were a part of the 2017 cohort of Our Bodies, Our Stories, an art mentorship program facilitated by the wonderful Kamala Makaral that had a lasting impact on both of our lives. Not only that, Faith has years of organizing experience and was a part of the founding of an amazing collective called VOLTA, which, unlike Black Girls Gather, was a COVID project. It was co-founded by 3 friends, Paige Kelleher, Meredith Meriduga, and our guest, Faith Paré, who had been doing organizing work long before the pandemic. VOLTA, like many other amazing collectives, was born through frustration with institutionalized oppression and a will to change the way things were done. They call for anti-carceral and transformative justice in our communities by attending to current social issues through the literary arts.
In connection to people. And now we're in this new era of having to connect. And we're still doing the same bullshit that we were doing before, the same kind of classic exclusions. We were like, well, we always talk about the show isn't accessible. That sucks. Or imagine if we actually had a show that had like all people of color who were on the lineup. And we were like, well, if we have all these desires and dreams that we want manifested, we have to manifest this ourselves. It also takes us away from just feeling like we're completely in a critical mode and into a positive and affirming and manifesting nature.
This was how their first show, Some of Us Did Not Die, was born. Influenced by the global protests that followed the death of George Floyd and raised over $4,000 that was given to Black folks who have recently been or are currently incarcerated in Canada. But this ambitious manifestation was not an easy one to pull off during the height of the pandemic. I asked them what it was like to organize their first event online.
Took about 4 months of planning. And not to gas myself up, but I haven't seen many shows with the same kind of scale, or many shows with the same kind of scale as Some of Us Did Not Die, at least in literary readings and performance, to be clear, because it involved very particular kinds of formal transitions between probably about 12 different performers, and it required ASL interpreters going back and forth on screen, required involvement of 2 live captioners. So we had like a group of 15 or 20 people behind the screen all at once, and having to try and deal with the sequencing and stuff like that. So not only was the day itself a lot of work, but the 4 months beforehand of getting those things into place was a lot of work.
The pandemic made my work easier because everybody just got Zoom.
That's Brayden Sonny White, who has a different experience with organizing virtually. He's of the Bear Clan of the Kanien'kehá:ka or Mohawk Nation and lives in the Akwesasne Mohawk territory. He is an Indigenous environmental consultant and works with the Haudenosaunee Environmental Task Force. He's also a mental health and Indigenous rights advocate and has sat on a panel with former U.S. President Barack Obama at the White House Tribal Nations Conference. He organizes cultural classes virtually, which are taught by Indigenous elders for communities within the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, especially so that younger generations can learn more about their cultures.
I want to make our culture as accessible as possible for people who really want to learn the culture and come back to our ways. So I had, planned all these classes, and I had such amazing people that were like willing to help me and make the time to teach these classes, and I was just forever thankful for them. What I've come to realize is that like you'll have part of a story that's like in Gunawaga, and then another part of story is like in the community in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and another teaching is over in Six Nations, Ontario, and then another part is down in Onondaga Nation near Syracuse, New York. So instead of like trying to travel to all these communities, I mean, as great as it would be, but with COVID and everything, you also don't want to put our knowledge bearers at risk.
Brayden also talked about how doing this online even helped enrich the classes.
Because even with our later classes, we had like knowledge bearers hopping on. They're like, then we'd go to a Q&A and they'd be like, oh, I just want to hop in. Like, hey, you mentioned this. Here's something I knew, like something in our community. So it was like, you had one knowledge bearer teaching, but then you also had other knowledge bearers listening and then adding on to what the panelist was talking about. So it was like you were getting more than just one community's perspective or version of a story. You're getting multiple.
And with the power of Zoom, something that would have been nearly impossible or really difficult to pull off happened.
Like I remember calling my friend, I'm like, we're gonna need a bigger like Zoom, and he's like, why, is it a lot? And I'm like, yeah, I got like 500 people signed up for a class. I'm like,
oh my god. I want all of us to take some time right now to feel gratitude for the people within our communities who were resilient and adaptable despite the challenges the pandemic presented. As needs arose during the pandemic, all other community struggles accumulated. Community organizers were able to step up quicker than authorities and institutions to meet all those needs because of their experience. They always did a lot with agility, care for their communities, and very little resources. For example, while Brayden has some really impressive things in his resume, like being on that White House panel, organizing classes to preserve his culture, all grand and important things, a lot of organizing work starts with helping the ones closest to you. Although generosity seems to be something that runs in his community.
The ways like my great-grandparents used to talk about was, if you see someone walking down the road, and they walk by your house, when it's dinner time, someone would always come out on the porch and say, "Hey, did you eat? Come on in. We'll set a plate for you. We'll set a spot table for you." When someone had a garden, and you grew too many tomatoes for the year, you had enough for your family, but the family 2 doors down had like 6 kids, and they weren't their garden didn't turn out well, or they didn't have like good financial standing. You would take your vegetables, all your extra, and you'd say, "Here, have it. This is feed your family with." So it was a very communal thing.
Plus, beyond his cultural classes, Brayden encourages the youth in his community in other little ways to get in touch with their cultural roots.
So engaged in, like through my travels working with different people in the Confederacy, like I've collected different songs for our social songs, and I always tell youth, hey, like if you're trying to learn, you want to be a singer, you want to learn how to sing social songs, show up to my house with a USB and I'll give you all the social songs I have.
Brayden's advocacy work in mental health and suicide prevention also comes from a personal place. After the panel with Obama, he had the opportunity to speak at his high school, and
because I just went up there and talked about what was close to my heart, which was talk about my friend who had passed due to suicide. And he was straight A student, star athlete, had a full ride to Cornell, and it was a sad thing that it happened, but that really woke me up to the realization of you can't put a face upon someone who's in crisis, so it really changed my approach in a lot of ways of and even moving forward, even now, I'm just straight up with people, if you ever need anything, don't be afraid to call me, here's my phone number, I'll answer the phone, and then it was interesting, even after that, when I started to advocate on a larger scale about how serious this is with suicide in Indigenous communities and suicide among youth, someone in my community actually reached out to me and was like, "Hey, I'm really going through it," and I was like, "Meet me somewhere then and we'll talk this out," and I helped them get help. Months later, they messaged me back. They're like, "Oh my God, thank you so much for getting me the help I needed and pointing me and getting the people in my circle that I needed to help get me back on track." And that's it's just little things like that really go a long way. And I'm really happy I got to be there when he was in crisis to help save his life.
As much as Brayden has done larger-scale advocacy and community organizing work, his seemingly small, mundane actions, like offering his phone number for peer support or making his culture accessible through technology to the larger community and youth, contrary to the kind of heroic community organizing you see on the media, felt really important for me to highlight. It really brings up the question of who are the people supporting the people around them so social change is sustainable and communities can thrive. Back to Black Girls Gather, Joanna reminds us of the revolutionary possibility of something as small as a book club that could help young Black girls relate to each other and build community with one another.
When Fabiola and Mariam approached me with that project, when they were still at the early stage of the project, I felt like I had to be part of it because it was something that I would have wanted to have. To have a space where you can gather and talk about your experience and share it with like-minded people, but people who are share that experience because they've been through it, it's different and it helps. So when they told me about it, I was like, sign me up. Sign me up. What do you need? I don't care if I'm at school. I don't care if I'm working. I'm going to put some time and I'm going to make sure that this project is successful because I believe in it. So, yeah.
Joanna also adds that the project is way more than a book club. Aside from weekly meetings,
we have painting workshops, we have dancing workshops, we had hair workshops, we had historical workshops with Rito Joseph, where the girls, I wasn't able to go, but the girls had this visit of the old port of Montreal, and they actually learned about the story around slavery and colonization in Montreal, and it's a story that is under.
in a world of white supremacy and systemic oppression, it's difficult for racialized and other marginalized communities to access spaces where you can show up as your whole self, where others inherently know the larger community's struggles, and where cultural knowledge and context are not taken for granted. This makes people who actively create these spaces a lifeline to the community.
We really wanted Black, queer, and trans people to be at the forefront of the show that we were creating because of the kinds of marginalization that queer, trans, Black folks experience, the ways that we have always been part of and at the forefront of liberation movement. And I think for me, Black literary practice and the Black literary practitioners that I've always admired, there always involves going out and interacting with other Black folks. In slave narratives that go back to the 18th century, reading is always equivocated in some kind of way with liberation because of the tangibility of this kind of tool to get you to certain places, but also because of the danger and the fugitivity of what does it mean for a enslaved person to become, self-enlightened in this kind of, and to recognize their own relationship to the world, to each other, through the absorption of new information. And the other thing that was very illegal for Black people to do across slaveholding societies was assembly and the commons, and very much so, Black people were restricted from gathering in places without white surveillance. And I think combining those things is a critical part of Black transformation.
Wow. I just want to marinate in that.
I like that. Marinate.
Talk to me tomorrow.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna.
The goal of life isn't to live forever, but to create something that does. And it was just if I can, spread as much culture as I can, I think that's the greatest thing, is because then that culture lives on.
Community organizing is making the work happen, is making it work. Oh, there's a great say that Christopher Ling used, and she said, don't let the perfect get in the way of the good. And I think that you get that done by merging the executive level of decision making with the shouters and the disruptors. It's only when those people are able to work together, and when those people are connected and are seeing the same things, that the work can actually happen.
In my own head, community organizing does not exist as the noun. It exists as a verb. It's something that's in motion.
Thank you again to Faith, Joanna, and Brayden for your generosity and for trusting me with your stories. This project has really touched me, and I'm really happy to be carrying what I learned forward with me and in my future work. Let us ask and continue asking, what is something we can do to support the ones closest to us? Please do follow our guests on social media and keep up with their awesome future projects. The links will be in the show notes for easy access. I I also can't say thank you enough for meeting this project with such enthusiasm, love, and support from my dear friend and co-editor, Nicolas Delgado, who also mixed and mastered this entire episode. What you're listening to in the background is Brian Lee's Roundabout. He is a pianist and composer in his third and final year of jazz studies at Concordia. He is the keyboard player in local band Ultra Fox. His social media links will also be in the show notes. Thank you again for listening to C'est La Vie's bonus episode. I enjoyed putting this episode together so much, and I hope you enjoyed listening as well. My name is Shin Ling Low. Hope to see you at a different occasion.